Jenna had always been drawn to thrift stores. To her, they were like time capsules, places where forgotten items waited for someone to rediscover them, and perhaps breathe new life into them. Growing up, she had spent weekends at garage sales and flea markets with her grandmother, who would patiently tell her stories about each peculiar item they found. Jenna's grandmother had passed away a few years ago, but Jenna kept up their shared tradition, wandering thrift stores on quiet, rainy days when the world seemed slow and muted. There was something calming about the quiet aisles and the subtle sense of worn paper and vintage fabrics. On a damp autumn afternoon, Jenna slipped into her favorite thrift shop. She had no particular goal, just a vague longing for the comforting anonymity of the store's cluttered aisles. As she wandered through the electronics section, her eyes landed on a small flip phone in a plastic bin labeled Electronics, $1. Its silver coating was worn and scratched, with a deep line where the paint had chipped away entirely, exposing the dull metal underneath. She picked it up, feeling an inexplicable pull as her fingers traced its battered surface. The phone was light and a little dented at the corners, but it had a nostalgic charm. It reminded her of the phones from her high school days, long before smartphones had woven themselves into every part of her life. Back then, phones were for calling and texting, not for sharing every detail of one's existence. Without thinking too much about it, Jenna took the phone to the counter. The cashier, a silver-haired woman with laugh lines and a sweater draped over her shoulders, raised her eyebrows when Jenna placed the phone on the counter. "Well, I'll be," she chuckled. "Didn't think anyone would ever pick that up. It's been in that bin for ages." Jenna shrugged. "I don't know why, but it just felt interesting." The cashier nodded thoughtfully. "Things like that often find the right person," she said. "I think people leave a little bit of themselves behind on things, you know?" Jenna laughed softly, feeling a strange warmth at the woman's words. She paid, thanked the cashier, and tucked the phone into her bag. As she drove home, the rain drumming steadily on her windshield, she couldn't stop thinking about the little phone. It felt oddly significant, as if it carried a weight beyond its battered casing. When she got home, Jenna shook off her damp coat and took the phone out of her bag. She rummaged through her junk drawer and found an old charger that surprisingly fit the device. Plugging it in, she watched the screen flicker to life with a dim, bluish glow. The battery icon showed it was nearly dead, but after a few minutes, it had enough charge to power on fully. Curious, she began clicking through the phone. To her surprise, it wasn't empty. The previous owner's contacts were still saved, though they were mostly labeled with initials and nicknames: Mom, Jen, Mark, Lisa. There were a few generic names like Dentist and Work, but the rest were familiar first names, suggesting close relationships. Jenna felt a pang of curiosity about these people and the person who had saved their numbers. She opened the gallery and found a handful of old photos. They were grainy, but Jenna could make out their details. There was a photo of a birthday cake, candles half melted, another of a golden retriever sprawled on a couch, and a series of selfies of a young woman laughing with friends. The woman was beautiful, with dark eyes and a radiant smile. Even in the poor quality of the images, she seemed vibrant, alive. Jenna lingered on the woman's face, feeling an inexplicable sadness. She wondered about this stranger's life, the friendships she'd had, the experiences she'd captured in these photos. She set the phone aside, trying to shake off the strange feeling, and went about her evening. Around midnight, just as Jenna was drifting off to sleep, a faint buzzing sound jolted her awake. Disoriented, she reached for her own phone, only to find it silent. After a moment, she realized the noise was coming from the flip phone on her nightstand. Frowning, she picked it up, confused. She hadn't activated any service on it, so she had no idea how it could be receiving messages. The screen glowed softly in the darkness, casting an eerie blue light across the room. There was a notification, one new message. She opened it, feeling a strange prickle of unease. "Are you there?" Jenna felt a chill. She checked the timestamp. It was dated just the day before. That didn't make any sense. Telling herself it was probably a glitch, she set the phone back down, though she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the message left behind. She lay in bed for a long time, staring up at the ceiling as the words echoed in her mind. The next morning, Jenna tried to shake off her unease. She went through her usual routine, telling herself the message was just a leftover text that had somehow reappeared. But as she poured her coffee, the phone buzzed again. She picked it up, her heart pounding. There were 3 new messages. "Please answer." "I'm so scared. He's watching me." A cold wave of fear washed over her. These weren't random leftover texts. The words felt immediate, desperate. Jenna typed back, her fingers shaking. "Who is this?" She stared at the screen, waiting for a reply, but none came. Minutes passed, and she finally set the phone down, trying to focus on her day. But the messages lingered in her mind like a dark shadow, an insistent tug at her thoughts that she couldn't ignore. That evening, Jenna found herself unable to relax. The messages replayed in her mind, their urgency and fear infecting her with a creeping anxiety. She kept glancing at the phone, half expecting it to buzz again. Around midnight, as she was about to give up on sleep, the phone vibrated softly. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and opened the new message. "Jenna, I need your help." The words froze her in place. She hadn't told anyone about buying the phone. She hadn't mentioned her name. Her mind raced, filling with a cold, crawling dread. "Who are you?" she typed back. The reply came almost immediately. "I need you to find him. I can't move on until he's found me." Her fingers shook as she typed again. "Who?" A long pause followed, as if the sender was hesitating. Finally, a new message appeared. "The one who took my life." The messages haunted Jenna's thoughts all night. She couldn't understand why, but the desperation in the words felt genuine, like someone was truly reaching out to her. Sleep was impossible. By morning, she felt drained, but she knew she couldn't ignore the mystery any longer. At work, Jenna spent her lunch break scrolling through news articles and old forum threads, searching for stories of haunted technology. She found dozens of anecdotes from people who'd received messages from deceased loved ones, but they all felt exaggerated or written for shock value. She kept looking, but nothing seemed to explain what she was experiencing. That evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows over her living room, Jenna decided to visit the thrift store again. She brought the phone with her, clutching it tightly as she approached the counter. The same cashier was there, and when Jenna asked about the phone, the woman's expression turned thoughtful. "Oh, that phone?" she said, tapping her chin. "It belonged to a young woman who went missing a few years ago. Her family donated all her things, hoping the proceeds would go to a good cause. It was a tragic story." Jenna felt a chill crawl over her skin. She asked the woman for the previous owner's name, her heart pounding with a sense of dreadful anticipation. "Maya Stevens," the cashier replied softly. "Her disappearance was a big deal around here. She was only in her early 20s, and one night she just vanished." The name hit Jenna like a punch to the gut. She remembered Maya Stevens' disappearance. It had been all over the news a few years ago. Maya had been a college student at the local university, known for her smile and her kindness. There had been candlelight vigils, missing person posters, pleas from her family and friends, but there had never been any trace of her. she had simply vanished, leaving a haunting question mark over her loved ones' lives. Jenna left the store in a daze, clutching the phone tightly in her hand. As she walked to her car, her mind raced with memories of the news coverage, the photos of Maya's smiling face plastered across newspapers and TV screens. How had she not recognized her in the photos on the phone? At home, Jenna powered on the phone again, her fingers trembling as she opened the messaging app. Sure enough, there was a new message waiting for her. "He's close. Please, Jenna. You're the only one left to help." Jenna typed back, her heart pounding. "What do you want me to do?" The response came almost immediately, as if Maya had been waiting for her. "Look for the tree by the old quarry. I'm there. My bones are there." Jenna's mind raced. The old quarry was on the outskirts of town, hidden deep in the woods, a place most people avoided. Her grandparents had told her stories about the quarry, warning her never to go there alone. They'd called it a cursed place, where strange things happened and people sometimes disappeared. She spent hours pacing her living room, torn between fear and a strange sense of duty. Every logical part of her mind told her to ignore the messages, to throw the phone away and forget this nightmare. But something deeper, something she couldn't explain, urged her to go. As dawn broke, Jenna finally gave in. She packed a flashlight, her phone, and a few supplies, then drove out to the quarry. The road was long and winding, and as she drove, the trees seemed to close in around her, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. She felt as though she were venturing into another world, a place where time and logic no longer applied. When she arrived, the quarry was silent, a desolate scar in the earth. She stepped out of her car, the silence pressing down on her as she made her way along the narrow path. She walked for what felt like hours, the quiet broken only by the sound of her footsteps and the rustling of leaves. Finally, she saw it. An ancient, gnarled tree with twisted roots clawing into the ground. Her heart pounded as she knelt beside it, feeling the earth cold and unyielding beneath her hands. She began to dig, her fingers scraping through the dirt and roots, her breath coming in shallow gasps. After what felt like an eternity, her hands struck something solid. She uncovered a small piece of fabric, yellowed and frayed, then a bone, half buried in the soil. Her breath caught as she realized what she'd found. The phone buzzed in her pocket. Jenna pulled it out, her hands trembling, and read the final message. "Thank you, Jenna. I'm free now." The screen dimmed, and the phone powered off, as if whatever had been keeping it alive had vanished. She pressed the power button repeatedly, but it was no use. The phone was dead, silent and empty, like it had never held a message at all. Jenna called the police, her voice steady but hollow as she reported what she'd found. When they arrived, they asked her questions, their faces a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. She told them she'd come across the site by chance, an intuition that had led her there, and they didn't press her further. Days passed, and Jenna tried to move on, but the experience lingered like a shadow, haunting her every thought. She couldn't shake the feeling that Maya's spirit was still with her, grateful yet watchful. Some nights, as she lay in bed, she thought she could still hear the faint buzz of a message, a whisper from beyond calling her name. And every time she would reach for the silent phone, her heart pounding with the fear and hope that Maya had more to say.